do have to be, you have to have a fairly strong stomach. I'm afraid there's no way around it. If you're somebody who can dissect the human, then you're probably going to be somebody who can cope with the different conditions in which the human is going to present themselves. So there's no getting away from the fact, if you're squeamish, it really isn't the profession for you at all. A lot of the television programs portray it as just being nice, dry, clean bone. It isn't. I mean, like this. It's not always like that, unfortunately. Sometimes it's bodies that are very recent, that have been exploded into pieces because of a bomb, or it's bodies that are very badly burnt, but very recent. So we might be at a fatal fire scene within hours of the fire actually occurring. So the individuals are very recent. It might be that they're very badly decomposed. So it's not for the squeamish. You know, if you've got a weak stomach, then no, don't do it. That's probably one of the defining characteristics. If you can cope with that, then you need to be a good, solid scientist. You need to be able to understand the principles of data collection, data analysis, probability, those things that are the certainties or the variations in our planet and in our species. So you can't get away from a good scientific understanding. You need to be nosy as heck. So you need to be able to be the kind of person who wants to know the answers to every single question. Who is this? Is it a male or a female? How old are they? Why are they lying like that? Where's the other part of their hand? All sorts of things, constant questions that you're seeking answers to. And you need to be an absolute and utter doubting Thomas. So you need to doubt every single thing you see and hear, because if you can question it and you can't come back to any other reason for why this might occur, then, you know, it's the old Sherlock Holmes principles. If there's no other reason, then it must be that one. But you need to be able to discount them. If you're the kind of person who's trusting, then you're likely to be misled. And so we're rather doubting and people who don't trust terribly easily. I think science is phenomenally important. I think having a focus for science in the community is extremely important. I think in schools we fall out of love with science eventually for a lot of people, and I don't quite understand why. Maybe it's because we use the word science, and maybe science scares people. But every single thing you do interacts with science. If it's your mobile phone, if it's boiling your kettle, if it's putting the light switch on, whatever it is requires you to interact with science. And I think science has got itself a bad press. And it's got itself a bad press by being full of people who are unable to, these aren't my views, full of people unable to communicate with normal folk. And when you say normal folk, that automatically assumes the scientists are not normal. And I wonder if there's just a space developed between the public and the scientist. Whereas in reality, if you go back to, you know, the days of Darwin and before, those people with just an inquiring mind got labelled as scientists. And I don't think the labels help us. The labels are you an art student or are you a scientist? We're all scientists. If you go and bake a cake, you're a scientist, because at the end of the day, you've got to put ingredients together in the right measures to create something. And by labelling, I hate labelling, and I think labelling has caused us part of the problem. So if you talk to some young people and say, do you want to go to a science centre? They'll go, oh no, that'd be boring. If you say to them, do you want to go to an Imaginarium? Oh, well, that sounds interesting. What's that? Well, it's just your imagination. Then I think they would be more inclined than to go to a science centre. Now that's nonsense. It's complete and utter nonsense. But I think the labels are part of a problem. The label as a scientist, the label as a science centre. Because what I think they are people who are really nosy, who want to know how the world works around them, want to be able to interact with that world around them, want to make it better. And they're surrounded by like-minded people. And that is what makes them, I think, incredibly special. So I have a huge soft spot for science centres. I have a huge soft spot because they're normally the most enthusiastic, down-to-earth, creative, imaginative people that you can find. That doesn't mean that they have to be scientists. It means they're really interesting people. So can't we call them interesting centres or imagination centres or something, and take away that label of science, because I think it is discriminating in some ways against the open-minded attitude of everybody that I ever see in any of these buildings. They're not scientists. They're just really interesting, committed people who want to have fun, who want to teach people, who want to gain understanding. And just because some of it goes into a science label, well, do you know, that's great. But I wonder how many kids we're losing by putting that label on. And I think it starts in schools. I think in schools they decide very early on, are you going to be a science student or are you going to be an art student? Everybody's a science student. Absolutely everybody is a science student. Everybody is an art student. Why in the human form? I mean, I blame Linnaeus. I blame Linnaeus for everything, because at the end of the day, he wanted to categorise everything into a nice, clean and tidy pigeonhole and put a label on it. And we like that order. Human nature likes the order of categorising everything. And I think science has become categorised. You look at Leonardo da Vinci, unquestionably a phenomenal scientist, a phenomenal artist, a phenomenal communicator. Wouldn't he have been really interesting? If you could have dinner with anyone who's dead, wouldn't you love to have dinner with Leonardo da Vinci? Simply because he would have been interesting, he would have been inquiring, and you could put so many labels on him as a polymath. That's what I think we need to be encouraging, is the polymath approach, because only then is the entirety of the subject bases around our community and our society, are we really going to get to grips with it. Okay, so I am a classic Presbyterian Scot, and as a classic Presbyterian Scot, what my father taught me was, you never blow your own trumpet. And if you do, and you have to put your head above the parapet to do it, someone will take it clean off. So I don't understand being a role model. I'm very grateful, and I'm humbled by it, and I'm honoured by it, but I'm really embarrassed by it, I have to say. So all that I do is that I like to think that if I can live my life the way that I'm comfortable in doing, and do more good than I do harm, then, you know, when it comes to the day of reckoning, maybe I'll be on the right side. So I'm just hedging my bets because I don't really know what's coming. But my grandmother was the most amazing woman, and she grew up in a little place called Glenelg, which is on the west coast. It's in the middle of nowhere, and she was there in the 1800s, and she never really travelled very far. As far as she ever went was to Inverness to marry my grandfather, and she had an incredible worldly expertise that was almost impossible given the parochialness of her background. And she always used to say to me growing up, look in the mirror. And when you look in the mirror, if you're comfortable with the eyes that are looking back at you, then you're probably doing okay. And when I was 15, my grandmother was given a diagnosis of terminal lung cancer. And yeah, she smoked 40 cigarettes a day. There's a fair clue as to why she had terminal lung cancer. And she was the most important person to me. And she said to me, why are you crying? Because I knew she was going to die. And I said, but I'm going to lose you. And she said, you're never going to lose me. I'm going to stay with you for the rest of your life. And I'm going to sit on your shoulder. And if you're ever going to do something and you want advice and you want to know if it's right, just listen. And I'll tell you. And she sat on my shoulder as my conscience my entire life. And if I hadn't listened to her, I'm sure I could have had much more fun than I've really had. But that conscience that she gave me makes me try to do good things rather than bad things. It tries to make me help people rather than step on others to get ahead. And I've always found that the more you give, the more you get back. The more you keep to yourself, the less you get. So that there is a real instilling of values that comes from a generation removed, 2 generations removed from mine, that is West Coast Glenelg, which is really, you're only here for a short time. And this is something that Richard Holloway says in his book, is that this really is a play. And it's a play that's been running for millions of years. And each one of us has just got a walk-on part. You know, it might be that our walk-on part lasts for 60 years or 80 years, or it might only be a few days. But that is our walk-on part. And there's no rehearsal for it. And there's no encore. So this is it. This life that you live is the only one that you get. And so therefore, you need to do it in the best way that you possibly can. And if in doing that you can help other people to do it, then I think it's a job quite well done. But I don't understand being a role model, because I think I have some truly dreadful qualities, which are that I could talk for Britain. I talk more than I listen, which is really not good. I tend to be reactive rather than proactive. I tend to have gut feelings rather than logical conclusions. All of these things that I would improve if, you know, I could just find the time and be bothered, because I'm inherently quite lazy as well. So I know that there are a lot of characteristics in there that are not good, and I wouldn't want those to be role models for anybody. But in terms of science, do you know, we've got some great role models in science. And we do need women. There's no doubt that we do need women role models, because in some parts of science it is still very male dominated. But you know, maybe that's part of natural order as well. It may well be that we will always have more male engineers than we will female, more male mathematicians than we have female. It may be that we will always have more female nurses than we have male, or female primary teachers than we have male. That's okay if it's a natural order, as long as what we don't have are hurdles and barriers to stop people doing it. So I think there are certain subjects that really grasp either girls or boys, and they follow with it. Things that we can't understand. If you look at forensic science, the STEM pipeline in forensic science is very female dominated. And it always has been, and it's not true just for the UK, it's true across the world. So girls who come into forensic science go all the way through the pipeline with very few leaks to the top. So you're as likely to get to the top of your profession in forensic science as a female as you are a male. And you could philosophize about that for as long as you like. The bold fact is, whatever it is in forensic science appeals more to females than it does to males. And it's not because they get preferential acceleration, it's because there's no barrier, there's no hurdle. So you're seeing the natural order of things. If you think about engineering, there is a bias still within some areas that think engineering's a boys' subject. Of course it isn't. But we have to overcome that bias, and we may never do it, but we can chip away at it. And within that, what we need to have is no barrier that says, well, if it is lots more boys that go for it, yeah, that's absolutely fine, because that's where they may well succeed, as long as we don't prevent the girls from doing it. And as long as along the process, what we don't do is discriminate against any group, so that we lose more girls in the pipeline or we lose more boys in the pipeline. That shouldn't happen. So that you should get a natural order at the end of the pipeline, in similar to what you have at the beginning of the pipeline. And along the way, if you can have little bright sparks, little bright spots of individuals who can encourage others who might be afraid to go down that route because they don't think it's the right thing for a boy to do or the right thing for a girl to do, then they become really important focuses that tell you it's possible. But what I can't do, and what I will never do, is discriminate one way or the other. So that, I mean, we've been in a position where my entire honours year has been 100% female. And that is not because we've discriminated against the boys in getting there. Absolutely not. We celebrate it when we've got some boys in our honours year, because it's fantastic to see them there. the 3 professors in my department were all women, not because I'd chosen that I wanted women to be professors, because when the job applications came out, they were the best person for the job. And I think it does us disservice when we set false targets, that we want to get 50% boys, 50% girls, or we want to have an all-female or an all-male lineup for a job. I think that does us a great disservice. We've come a long way in terms of equality. We're not finished, not by any means are we finished. It's a lot better than it was. All we need to do is take away the hurdles and take away the biases and take away those things that are stopping people themselves from doing it. Then I think we'll find a natural order. I'm a great optimist for a natural order, and I really genuinely believe in equality, which apparently makes me a feminist. I didn't know that. I always thought a feminist was somebody that was pro-female. It isn't. Feminists are about equality, and I absolutely and utterly support equality, but I don't support discrimination, whether it's negative discrimination or positive discrimination. What's it like being a scientist that's publicly recognised? My husband rather cruelly introduced me as his celebrity scientist wife, which is really charming. Thank you, darling. It does a number of things. Some are good, some are bad. It allows you to get audiences with people. It allows you to go and talk to people. It allows you to go and make a difference because it's a name that they understand. I don't think I ever quite get comfortable with it, but if you can use it, then I will. And the other side of it is the public. And the public can be incredibly kind and they can be incredibly funny, but they can also be incredibly intrusive. So we did 8 episodes of a television series called History Cold Case, and we had about 3 million viewers a night. So you appear in somebody's sitting room 3 million times around the country. And as a result, people feel they know you. You don't know them, but they know you. And so they think it's quite acceptable to plop themselves down in front of you on a train and tell you how much older you look on the camera and how much heavier you look in the camera. And did I not know that there was a river that went through wherever it was? How could I not know that? For goodness sake. And by the way, when that shot was happening of you driving across the bridge, you weren't going south, you were driving north. And so they find ways to interact with you and to criticize you. Now, you could take that negatively, but actually it's quite a compliment because it means they watched it and they watched it quite carefully and they feel comfortable with you. But it can be a little bit intrusive sometimes when people will stop you and say, "Oh, aren't you?" And I had a lovely moment when I was down in Livingston and I was giving evidence in court there, and because I was on court first thing in the morning, I had to go down the night before, and there was a lady in the queue in front of me at the hotel reception, and she turned around and she did, "I know you from somewhere." "I know," she says, "you used to work in Matalan." And I said, "Yes, I did." I said, "I used to work in the big pants section of Matalan," which was all complete and utter fabrication. And this poor woman and I talked for about 10-15 minutes on outsized ladies' lingerie in Matalan. And I'm sure somewhere along the line, somewhere, she's going to see me do something and go, "God, she's done well for herself, hasn't she? She used to work in Matalan." But it's the fact that your face and your voice and who you are suddenly no longer your own. And I can only imagine what it must be like if you're Tom Cruise or somebody like that. It must be incredibly intrusive. And I've been very fortunate to do some episodes of The Infinite Monkey Cage with Brian Cox. And Brian, amazingly, is actually quite shy. And he's only in his element when he's talking science. That's the only time he's in his element. He gets completely and utterly excited and over the top. And there's a real sort of charming innocence about him in that regard, and you can see why he's so well liked and so well loved. But what really struck with me about him was that we were coming out of BBC Broadcasting House one evening, having just done The Infinite Monkey Cage, and he was busy philosophizing about time or whatever it was, something which I completely didn't understand, quantum physics or something. And there was a group of girls outside that obviously wanted selfies and autographs and things. And you could see him just flip a switch and he became the personality that they wanted him to be. and then when he walked away from them, he flipped back and off he was into quantum physics. And that for me was a really good lesson that says you can afford to be more than one thing at a time. And if these members of the public want to buy your books, or they want to come to your programs, or they want to watch your television or listen to your radio, then you have a duty to pay back to that. There's something they've bought into, so you have to buy into it as well. And it's really uncomfortable initially, but you get used to it. So I've just been doing a number of book festivals, and so again, you know, once you've done the event, there are 700 or 800 people in that room that know you now that didn't know you before. And so as you walk out, they want to stop you and they want to talk to you and they tell you about this, and they want to ask you about, and it's just trying to keep yourself that, you know, you have this responsibility to interact with them because you've put yourself there. So it can be very positive, it can be quite challenging, and it can be negative. So we do sometimes, you know, get the kinds of emails and letters that you would rather not, because they're inappropriate, but those are rare. By and large, the public are mad as a box of frogs, but a huge amount of fun and generally very, very well-meaning.